The world was changing fast, and Elena could feel it in every fiber of her being. Humans had always been small, fragile creatures in the grand scale of the universe. But now, something had shifted. Their awakening wasn't just about power. It was about something deeper, something that connected them to the very essence of the universe. She could sense it in her bones, in the air around her. The universe had made its decision. And now, humanity had to live with the consequences. Elena stood in the middle of a war room, surrounded by the leaders of various human factions. The walls were covered in maps of Earth and alien territories, and the atmosphere was tense. The fight was coming, and the aliens were already preparing to destroy them. The Sentients, an ancient alien race, had tried to warn them. But the humans had never listened. Now, the universe was on the brink of collapse, and the fate of humanity hung in the balance. "We can't just sit here," Elena said, her voice steady but filled with urgency. "We've been given this power for a reason. The aliens may have thought they could control us, but they were wrong. We don't need to fear them. We can fight back." The room fell silent as everyone turned to her. The Sentients had come to Earth with one clear message: don't mess with the humans. Their ancient power, locked away for centuries, was now waking up, and the aliens knew that once the humans understood what they were capable of, they would change the balance of the universe forever. A man named Jared, who had become one of the leaders of the human resistance, spoke up. "We don't even know the full extent of our powers yet. We're still learning. We can't risk going up against the Sentients without being prepared. What if we make a mistake?" Elena's eyes hardened as she stared at him. "What if we do nothing? What if we let them wipe us out before we even have a chance to fight back?" There was a heavy silence. Jared knew that Elena was right. They had to act. They had no choice. The humans had already awakened to their powers, and they were more than capable of defending themselves. But the real question was, were they strong enough to face the Sentients? Elena turned to the map of the alien fleet. The Sentients had begun to assemble their forces, ready to strike. But what the aliens didn't realize was that humanity was no longer just a weak, unsuspecting species. They had evolved. They had become something more than they had ever been before. Some could move objects with their minds, others could manipulate the elements, and some could even control the minds of others. The power was vast, and it was still growing. Elena's team had been working nonstop to develop a strategy to fight the aliens. Their first plan was to take the fight to the skies. The humans' telekinetic abilities were strong enough to take control of the alien ships, but they would need more time to master their powers and make sure they were prepared for the full scale of the alien onslaught. In the days that followed, Elena trained with her team. They practiced harnessing their powers, pushing themselves to the limit. Jared, who had once been afraid of his own abilities, was now a force to be reckoned with. He could lift heavy objects with his mind, create powerful energy shields, and even control the weather to some extent. But it wasn't just his abilities that had changed, it was his mindset. He no longer saw himself as just a survivor. He saw himself as a protector, a warrior. The humans had learned to adapt quickly. The more they trained, the more they realized how much potential they had. But as they grew stronger, the threat from the Sentients became more real. The aliens were not going to wait for them to be ready. They were going to strike first, and if they did, the humans had to be ready to face them head-on. One night, as the team prepared for their final battle plan, Elena gathered everyone together. "This is it," she said, her voice filled with determination. "We've trained, we've learned, and now it's time to fight. The Sentients think they can control the universe, but they've made a mistake. We have the power to stop them. It's time we show them what humans are really capable of." The group nodded in agreement. They were no longer afraid. They had seen what the Sentients were capable of, and they knew they couldn't let them win. The fate of the universe, and of humanity, depended on this moment. As the team prepared to leave for the battlefield, Elena stood on the balcony, looking up at the stars. The universe was vast, filled with unknown dangers. But she knew one thing for sure. The humans were no longer the weak, helpless creatures they had once been. They were powerful. They had awakened, and now they would fight for their future. "Let's go," Elena whispered to herself. "It's time." The battle for Earth had begun. The world was changing, and no one could deny it. Across every corner of Earth, strange things were happening. People were experiencing unexplainable powers, things that defied logic, things that made the impossible seem possible. At first, it was small. A person would lift a heavy object with nothing but their will. Another might hear voices or see things that weren't really there. It was confusing, terrifying, and exhilarating all at once. But it wasn't just random. It was happening to everyone, everywhere. The human race, once confined to the limitations of their physical bodies, were beginning to evolve, to awaken to something far greater than they could comprehend. Elena stood in the middle of a busy city street, watching the chaos unfold around her. Cars swerved as people instinctively, telekinetically pushed them out of the way, and strangers were suddenly throwing fire from their hands, not in anger, but as if the flames were simply an extension of their will. She had felt it too, the energy coursing through her veins, urging her to do things she hadn't even dreamed of before. At first, she thought it was just her, maybe some freak accident, a trick of the mind. But when she saw others, ordinary people, do the same, she realized it wasn't just a random anomaly. Something much bigger was happening. Elena had learned to control her abilities faster than most. She could move objects with her mind, create barriers of invisible energy, and even manipulate small elements like wind or water. The first time she'd called upon the wind, it had swept through the street with such force that it knocked a few trees over. It was a power she hadn't known existed, and yet it felt as though it had always been there, just waiting to be unlocked. At first, she thought maybe it was just some kind of collective human evolution. But the more she learned, the more she realized something darker was at play. It wasn't just humanity changing. It was something unnatural. The feeling that something was watching them, guiding them, grew stronger with each passing day. They weren't just awakening to a new power. They were being shaped by it. It was as though the very universe was changing its rules, unlocking something deep within humanity that had been dormant for eons. Meanwhile, not everyone was thrilled by the changes. The world was on edge. Governments struggled to keep control, and panic spread as people feared the unknown. Would these new abilities be used for good, or were they a threat? Some believed they could harness the powers to improve the world, to create peace, while others feared the chaos it would bring. As humanity's abilities grew, so did the unease. And then came the messages, the first warning. It started as a voice, soft, distant, but chilling. "You have no idea what you've awoken." It came in waves, almost as if the voice was transmitted through the air itself. The warnings, strange symbols, and images flooded Earth's communications networks, from news channels to private messages. It was like an alien broadcast, a clear, unmistakable warning. The universe had a rule, and the humans had broken it. The warning wasn't just a statement, it was a threat. You have no idea what consequences await you for breaking the balance. It was clear now. They were not the only ones who had been watching. The humans had unknowingly triggered something ancient, something powerful, a force that had been waiting for the right moment to awaken. The sentients, an advanced alien race that had observed humanity for millennia, had left these warnings as a final attempt to prevent the inevitable. The message was clear. Humans weren't meant to rise. They were meant to stay small, powerless, and unaware of their true potential. Their power was a danger not just to themselves, but to everything around them. Elena and her team struggled to understand what was happening. But as they pieced together the scattered transmissions and strange symbols, it became clear the sentients were not going to sit idly by while humanity grew stronger. They were preparing for a confrontation. The balance had already been disrupted. Now, it seemed like the universe itself was rallying against humanity's awakening. But Alina wasn't afraid. She had seen the power inside her, felt it in her blood, and she wasn't going to let it be taken away. The humans might have broken the rules, but they had awakened. There was no going back. As the days passed, Alina saw the changes around her. People were no longer just individuals. They were part of something larger. They were learning to harness their abilities, to use their newfound powers to protect themselves and each other. But Alina knew they couldn't wait any longer. The universe was moving against them, and the time to act was now. Humanity's survival depended on it. The sentients might have thought they had control, but Alina and her people weren't going to back down. They were going to face this threat head-on, whether the universe agreed with it or not. They had awoken to their true potential, and now they would fight for their right to exist. The battle had only just begun. The sentients were ancient, a race so old and powerful that their name alone struck fear across galaxies. They had long watched humanity from the shadows, monitoring Earth with quiet apprehension. They knew what humanity was capable of, but they also understood the dangerous potential of what would happen if humans ever awakened their full power. For centuries, they had kept humanity in check, subtly influencing history, ensuring that humans remained ignorant of their true potential. They had followed the rule, never wake the humans. But it was too late now. The awakening had begun. The first signs were subtle, small bursts of energy, unexpected acts of strength, and unusual phenomena in various parts of the world. But as the powers continued to grow, so did the fear within the sentients. What had once been a quiet, controlled species now found themselves confronting a force that was unpredictable and far more dangerous than they had anticipated. The humans had broken the most fundamental law in the universe, the law that no species should ever surpass its place in the cosmic hierarchy. The leader of the sentients, Thoreth, watched from his command center, his eyes burning with a quiet rage. The image of humanity's sudden evolution filled the screens in front of him. Humans weren't supposed to rise like this, he thought. They were not ready, not worthy. They had disrupted the balance, and now they would have to pay the price. Soreth's mind raced as he stared at the Earth from the alien fleet. Every pulse of power from the humans seemed to spread through the cosmos like a ripple. The universe was reacting to their awakening, and with each passing day, the consequences grew more severe. The sentients knew they had no choice but to strike quickly before humanity's newfound abilities completely spiraled out of control. They've broken the rule, Thoreth muttered to himself. Now we will see if they can survive their own awakening. The sentients were preparing their weapons, their fleets, and their most dangerous technology to launch an attack on Earth. Their plan was simple: wipe humanity out before they could fully realize the scope of their abilities. There was no other way. If humans were allowed to continue evolving at this rate, they would become an unstoppable force, capable of threatening the entire galaxy. The sentients had failed in their control, and now they had to correct the error before it was too late. Back on Earth, the humans were slowly starting to realize the scale of what was coming. Alina and her team had learned enough to understand the magnitude of the threat facing them. They knew they were not just fighting for survival anymore. They were fighting for the future of the entire human race. Alina had been receiving more transmissions, encrypted messages from unknown sources, warning her of the impending attack. The messages were clear. The sentients were coming. But what really confused Alina was the tone of the messages. It wasn't just a threat. There was a sense of fear in the transmissions, a deep, unsettling fear that told her just how dangerous their enemies truly were. "They're afraid of us," Alina said softly to herself, looking at the glowing screen. "Why would they be afraid of us?" Her mind was racing as the pieces began to fall into place. The sentients didn't just want to destroy humanity. They were scared of what humans could become. They feared the awakening. The humans had been asleep for so long, dormant and unaware, but now they had begun to rise. And as they did, they threatened to rewrite the rules of the universe. What if they're right? Jared, one of Alina's closest allies, asked. His voice was filled with doubt, his eyes wary. What if we're not meant to have this power? What if we really are a threat to the balance of everything? Elena turned to him sharply. We can't let fear control us. If we don't fight back, if we don't take control of our destiny, then we might as well just hand Earth over to them. Jared sighed, looking down at the ground. But how? How can we fight against something so powerful? We're still learning our own abilities, and the sentients, they've been around for longer than we can even imagine. They know how to destroy us. We have something they don't, Elena replied, her voice steady, but with a hint of determination. We have unity. We have each other. And we have the will to survive. It wasn't just the powers they had unlocked. It wasn't just their abilities to manipulate energy, control the elements, or move objects with their minds. What made them truly dangerous was the human spirit, the ability to fight, to adapt, to survive in the face of overwhelming odds. The sentients had underestimated humanity for too long, but now it was clear. They were underestimating us no more. The humans might have been afraid at first, but now they were gathering their strength. They were learning to use their newfound powers in unison. They had to work together, pushing their abilities to their limits, tapping into something far deeper than they understood. The more they trained, the stronger they became. They were learning to manipulate the very fabric of reality, controlling the flow of energy, bending time itself. It was unbelievable, and yet it was happening. And all the while, the sentients watched, waiting for the humans to slip up, to make a mistake. But Elena and her team were determined. They couldn't afford to make a mistake. They had to prepare for the war that was coming, to prepare for the confrontation that would determine the fate of their entire species. And with each passing day, as the humans honed their powers, they grew more certain of one thing. They were ready to fight, no matter the cost. They would face the sentients head-on, and they would prove that humanity was not something to be controlled, not something to be feared. They were more than that. The humans were no longer just surviving. They were learning to fight. The training was intense, relentless, and it pushed them to their limits. Elena had quickly become the center of this resistance, the one who guided them through the chaos, the one who had faith when others began to doubt. Their powers were still new, unpredictable, but the humans had learned the most important lesson of all. They were not powerless anymore. The resistance had grown quickly. Across the globe, others had joined Elena's cause, people who had discovered their abilities and were eager to use them to protect their families and their homes. It didn't matter where they were from or who they were before this moment. The human spirit was what connected them all. Whether it was a woman in Japan who could control the tides or a man in Africa who could conjure fire with a thought, they all stood united now, ready to face the threat that the sentients posed. It was a new world they were creating, one where humans had the power to defend themselves. But with every victory, there came an equal and opposite challenge. The sentients were not standing still. As the humans grew stronger, so too did the alien forces, who had been tracking their progress with growing concern. The alien fleets were now positioned at the edge of Earth's atmosphere, ready to make their final move. "We're not ready yet," Jared said, his voice full of doubt as he looked over the map that showed the alien fleet gathering. Elena stared at the same map, her fingers tracing the glowing coordinates. She understood his fear, but she also knew that there was no time left. The war was already here, and they couldn't afford to wait. "We don't have the luxury of time," Elena said, her voice calm but determined. "We fight now, or they destroy us all. We'll never have the chance to stop them if we wait." "But we don't even know the full extent of our powers," Jared protested. "We can barely control the basic abilities we've unlocked. What happens when the sentients bring their full force down on us? What if we can't handle it?" Elena turned to him, her eyes hardening. "We can handle it because we have each other. We may not be perfect, but we're human. We adapt, we learn, and we never give up. The sentients might have been around longer than we can imagine, but they've never had what we have. They've never had humanity's drive." There was silence in the room as Jared absorbed her words. He wasn't fully convinced, but something in Alina's voice resonated with him. Perhaps it was her unwavering belief in humanity, or perhaps it was the realization that they had no other choice. In the days that followed, the humans went into overdrive. They worked together, coordinating their efforts, training in groups to learn how to use their powers more effectively. They weren't just using telekinesis or manipulating fire anymore. They were learning to control energy fields, creating shields strong enough to withstand the sentient's advanced weaponry. Some of them could now teleport short distances, while others were learning to tap into the very fabric of time, slowing it down or speeding it up in moments of critical need. The power of the humans was becoming undeniable. Alina knew they still had a long way to go, but as she looked at the faces of those around her, people who had once been ordinary, afraid of what they were becoming, she saw something new. They were no longer the same. They were warriors, and they were ready to fight. They had one chance, one shot at survival. The sentients weren't just coming to destroy them. They were coming to eradicate everything. The balance the sentients had worked so hard to maintain was threatened by the humans' rise. They couldn't allow it to continue. As the alien ships descended, Alina stood before her team. The resistance had gathered in a secure location, a massive underground base hidden from the enemy's surveillance. The moment of truth was upon them. "Today, we make our stand," Alina said, her voice ringing with resolve. "We fight not just for Earth, but for every future generation of humans. We fight for our right to live on our own terms." Jared stepped forward, his hands trembling slightly, but his expression determined. He had come a long way from the man who had once been afraid of his powers. Now, he understood what was at stake. This wasn't just about fighting the sentients, it was about fighting for their place in the universe. The first wave of sentient ships broke through the atmosphere, their enormous shadows blocking out the sun. The ships were sleek, dark, and ominous, their weapons already primed and ready to fire. The humans had no intention of waiting for the first strike. Alina and her team moved out, ready to face the aliens head-on. As they reached the surface, the alien ships opened fire, sending blasts of energy toward Earth. But the humans were ready. A few of the most powerful fighters raised their hands, and in an instant, the blasts were deflected by energy shields. The humans were learning faster than the sentients had anticipated. They were becoming a force to be reckoned with. The battle rage. Alina herself was in the front lines, her powers flowing through her like an unstoppable force. She created barriers to protect the others, manipulating energy and deflecting the alien fire. Jared, alongside her, used his control over the weather, creating violent winds and lightning to strike at the sentient ships. Every time one of the alien vessels was hit, it shuddered and began to fall from the sky. It was clear that the humans weren't just fighting. They were winning. But this was only the beginning. The sentients would not give up easily. They would retaliate, and they would do everything in their power to destroy humanity before they could fully realize their potential. As the humans fought with everything they had, Alina knew that this battle wasn't just about survival. It was about proving that humanity could rise to its destiny and never be ruled again. The universe had one rule: don't wake the humans. But they had done so, and now humanity was ready to fight back. The battle for Earth was far from over. It had begun with uncertainty and fear, but now it was a war fueled by hope, defiance, and an unyielding will to survive. The humans had taken the first step. They had faced the sentients' assault head-on and had pushed them back. But Alina and her team knew that this was only a small victory in a much larger war. The sentients would regroup. They would come again, and they would come harder. For now, Earth was safe. The sentients had underestimated humanity's rise. They had thought the humans were no match for their advanced technology and ancient power. But the humans were not the weak species they had once been. Their powers had awakened, and the universe itself had felt it. Now, Alina and the Resistance knew that humanity was no longer simply defending their planet. They were defending their right to exist, to choose their own destiny. The humans had discovered the full extent of their abilities. They had not just awakened the power to manipulate elements or control minds. They had tapped into something even more profound, an energy that connected them to the very fabric of the cosmos. It was an energy that had always existed within them, lying dormant, waiting for the right moment to reveal itself. And now, that moment had come. The resistance continued to train, pushing their limits further every day. They were learning to harness the energy that flowed through them, to use it as a weapon, a shield, and a way to communicate with each other in the heat of battle. They were evolving at an astonishing rate, faster than anyone, even the sentients, had expected. The power was intoxicating, and Elena felt it coursing through her with each passing day. But with that power came responsibility. The more they harnessed, the more they knew they had to be careful. One mistake could mean the end of everything they had fought for. Despite the growing strength of the humans, the threat from the sentients had not disappeared. Their enemies had retreated, but they hadn't given up. Soreth, the leader of the sentients, was now more determined than ever to see humanity destroyed. The battle on Earth had revealed to him that the humans were not just a threat to their empire. They were a threat to the entire universe. The sentient fleets had been forced to retreat, but they were rebuilding. They were preparing for a final, decisive strike. Soreth had rallied his forces, and now the universe was watching with bated breath as the sentients readied themselves for the next phase of their plan. Their defeat on Earth had not broken their resolve. It had only made them angrier. Elena could feel the tension building in the air. She and her team had prepared as much as they could. They had strengthened their defenses, refined their tactics, and pushed their powers to their limits. But despite their growing strength, they were still outmatched. The sentients were an ancient race with technology far beyond anything Earth had ever seen. The humans were still in the process of learning how to truly use their powers, and time was running out. The question that loomed in Elena's mind was simple, but it was the one that terrified her more than anything else. Would they be ready in time? Days passed in a blur of preparation and training. The sentient fleet loomed larger in the sky every day, their ships filling the atmosphere like dark clouds gathering for a storm. Elena could sense the growing fear among her people, and she couldn't blame them. The first wave of attack had been a victory, but victories didn't guarantee survival. Elena stood in the command center, staring at the monitors as the alien fleet neared. The entire planet had been mobilized. Every nation, every faction that had once been divided, had come together for this single, crucial moment. Humanity's greatest strength was no longer its technology, its armies, or its resources. It was its unity. "We've come this far," Jared said quietly, standing beside Elena. "Now we have to finish this." Elena turned to face him, her eyes determined. "This isn't just about fighting the sentients anymore. It's about proving to the universe that we belong here, that we deserve to live on our own terms. They may have tried to control us, but we are not their puppets. We are humanity, and we will decide our fate." As the last wave of resistance fighters took their positions, Elena's thoughts were interrupted by the sudden arrival of the sentient fleet. Hundreds of ships dropped from the skies, their massive forms blotting out the stars. Their weapons were primed, and their intentions were clear. Humanity would either bend to their will or be destroyed. The battle that followed was unlike anything the world had ever seen. The skies were torn apart by blasts of energy, and the earth itself trembled as the two forces clashed in the sky and on the ground. The humans had learned to use their powers with increasing precision. They could teleport behind enemy lines, blast ships from the sky with concentrated energy, and create barriers strong enough to deflect the aliens' deadliest attacks. But the sentients were relentless. They fought back with a fury that only ancient beings, whose very existence was tied to the cosmos, could muster. They had weapons capable of wiping out entire cities, weapons that the humans had no way of matching. Yet, Elena and Jared led the charge on the ground, using their combined abilities to strike at the heart of the alien forces. As they fought, Elena felt a growing sense of unity among the humans. They were not just individuals anymore. They were a collective force, each of them amplifying the other's powers. The sentients were no longer facing a disorganized group of humans. They were facing a cohesive army, one bound by a shared purpose, a shared belief that their future was theirs to shape. The fight was fierce. Ships fell from the sky. Explosions rattled the ground. But the humans were not backing down. Alina could feel the energy around her, feel the force that connected them all. She focused her mind, raising her hand to create a massive energy shield that deflected a deadly energy blast aimed at their forces. But she knew that wasn't enough. They needed to end this now, before the sentients had a chance to regroup. "Jared, we need to take out their command ship. It's the heart of their fleet," Alina shouted, her voice carrying over the chaos of the battlefield. Jared nodded, determination flashing in his eyes. He raised his hands to the sky, calling forth a storm of lightning that tore through the air toward the enemy flagship. Alina used her powers to create a path through the chaos, guiding their team through the heart of the sentient fleet. The final confrontation was approaching, and as Alina's team neared the command ship, she knew that the future of humanity rested on their shoulders. This battle would determine everything. It would decide whether the humans would live to continue their journey, or if they would fall under the weight of the universe's rules. The universe had one rule, but humanity was about to rewrite it. The final moments of the battle were a blur of destruction, power, and raw determination. The sentient fleet, which had once appeared invincible, was now on the verge of collapse. Their once pristine ships were battered and smoking, their weapons no longer as effective against the relentless human assault. Alina and her team had fought with everything they had, pushing their abilities to new extremes, discovering strengths they never knew existed. But the battle wasn't over yet. There was still one task left, one final strike to ensure humanity's survival. As Alina and Jared reached the heart of the sentient fleet, the massive command ship loomed ahead, an imposing structure that seemed to pulse with energy, like a living thing. The sentients had clearly invested everything in this ship. It was their center of power, the source of their strength. Destroying it would cripple their forces, but it would not be easy. The closer they got, the more difficult it became to avoid the onslaught of energy blasts, which rained down upon them from every direction. "We need to destroy the core," Alina shouted, her voice steady despite the chaos around her. "That's the only way to end this." Jared nodded, his eyes narrowing with focus. His powers over the weather had been instrumental in the battle, summoning storms and lightning to strike down the alien ships, but this would be different. The command ship was heavily shielded. They couldn't rely on brute force alone. Alina felt the pull of the energy that connected them all, the humanity within them, the power they had unlocked, the shared resolve to survive. They were no longer just individuals with powers. They were something greater, something more. They were a force that had the ability to shape the universe's fate. But to wield that power, they would have to fight harder than ever. They darted forward, weaving through the hail of enemy fire, using their newfound abilities to protect themselves, to strike back with incredible precision. Alina's energy shields deflected the most dangerous blasts, while Jared's storms swirled around them, tearing through the remaining sentient forces. But as they approached the command ship, they were met with an overwhelming force. The ship's defenses came to life, activating a series of energy cannons that targeted them with deadly accuracy. "Alina!" Jared yelled, his voice rising in alarm. "We're being surrounded." She didn't need to look to know what he meant. The sentients were closing in, cutting off any escape. The skies were filled with enemy ships, and the ground beneath them trembled with the power of the alien weapons. Time was running out, and the command ship was getting closer with every passing moment. But Alina had one last trick left. She concentrated, reaching deep within herself, tapping into the energy that had been building within her since the beginning of this fight. It was more than just power. It was will, determination, and a deep connection to all of humanity. In that moment, Alina understood the true extent of her abilities. She wasn't just manipulating energy. she was becoming energy. With a shout, she released a wave of energy so powerful it split the air around her. The shockwave knocked back several sentient ships, sending them spiraling out of control. But that was just the beginning. As the energy continued to build, Alina directed it with a force that was almost impossible to control. The energy swirled around her and Jared, encasing them in a protective barrier while simultaneously overwhelming the enemy. "We have to do this together," Alina said, her voice filled with urgency. Jared looked at her, his eyes wide. "What do you mean?" "I need you to help me focus," Alina said, gritting her teeth. "We need to channel everything we have into one final strike. It's the only way we can destroy the core." He nodded without hesitation. They had no time for second-guessing. Together, they raised their hands, and the energy around them crackled with power. It felt like the very air was alive, charged with the force of the universe itself. Alina focused everything she had into one single point, the core of the command ship. She could feel Jared doing the same, using his weather-manipulating powers to amplify the storm of energy that was swirling around them. For a moment, everything seemed to slow down. Time stretched, and Alina could hear nothing but the pounding of her own heart. This was it. This was the moment that would determine the fate of humanity. The energy built to a crescendo, a blinding light that illuminated the battlefield, casting everything in a ghostly glow. Alina and Jared were now one, their powers intertwined, their resolve unshakable. With a final, unified push, they released the energy. The command ship erupted in a violent explosion, a massive shockwave that rippled through the sky, sending out a blast so powerful it knocked every remaining sentient ship from the sky. The earth trembled beneath their feet as the blast traveled outward, destroying everything in its path. It wasn't just the ship that was destroyed. It was the heart of the sentient fleet, their last hope for victory. For a moment, there was silence. Then the sky cleared. The sentient ships, crippled and scattered, began to retreat, their once unshakable resolve broken. The humans had won. The battle for Earth was over. But the victory came at a cost. Alina collapsed to her knees, her body drained from the enormous energy exertion. Jared, too, staggered, his face pale and exhausted. The fight had taken everything out of them. But as they looked around at the destruction they had caused, at the scattered remnants of the sentient fleet, they knew it had been worth it. They had done what the universe had once deemed impossible. They had survived. Humanity had proven that it would not be controlled. They had broken the rule that the sentients had set for them. And now, they were free to choose their own destiny. The universe, for the first time in millennia, was going to have to face the reality that humanity was not a species to be ignored or destroyed. They had awakened, and they would never go back to sleep. Alina looked up at the sky, the weight of the battle lifting from her shoulders. The war had been won, but the real journey was just beginning. The future was uncertain, but one thing was clear. Humanity had a place in it, a place of strength, of freedom, and of hope. As the last of the sentient ships disappeared into the void, Alina turned to Jared, a weary but proud smile on her face. "We did it," she said softly. Jared smiled back, his eyes tired but filled with an unspoken understanding. "We're just getting started." And together, they watched as humanity stepped into its new future, a future where anything was possible.